Welcome to Step Into the Pivot. We're your hosts. I'm Teresa Conti.
And I'm Ivana Polonio. We talk with people just like you. We have honest conversations about current issues that women and men face and how we pivot to address them in our lives.
This podcast is your companion as you step into a workout or take some time for yourself.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Step Into the Pivot, where we're talking to Teresa Howe and some really, kind of like double pivots that she's had in her life that really, obviously allowed her to learn a lot about herself and grow and expand. And I can't wait to hear, Teresa, your story and your answers. Um, Now, I would like to ask the other Teresa, the one who's here with us each episode, to introduce our Teresa with a little more substance than what I just did, because the two of you go back a long way. You know each
Yeah.
other pretty well.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And thank you, Teresa, for being here. We really do appreciate having you on today. And actually, Teresa and I do not go back as far, although we've known of each other. So we really come together because of my husband. And he told me that, they've known each other since 1999, which is a long time. The other difference about Teresa is that, she's not kind of our typical guest. Most of our guests are in the financial services industry, and she's in the real estate industry, which is a little bit different. She has worked in relocation and real estate for over 30 years. So working for a lot of different companies that you would know, Coldwell Banker, Pacific Union, Compass, some of those types of companies, which in a lot of ways, when you think about it, are similar to financial services. A lot of the people at the top are men. Women a lot of times hit that glass ceiling. So I think that it's a nice to hear that it's not just in our industry, but there are challenges, right? Sometimes for women across the board. And I really do want to just kind of dive right in with this, knowing you've had that 30-year career at one company and it ended up in a surprise layoff. And then 2 years later, you got laid off again. So tell us kind of what happened there and how it really affected you.
Yeah, it was, when you work for a company that long, I had kind of not through intentional effort so much, but I had continued to add responsibility, territory. I was managing a 5-state region by the end there. And, at some point you kind of feel like that you're such an integral part of the company that nothing could ever happen. I mean, the departments that I managed made millions of dollars in profit, like millions. And so, I kind of, I think, got comfortable in assuming that I was going to finish my career out there. And we started, and this was back in 2016, they changed our reporting to be from local to national, to the national headquarters. And that was a weird sign to me. And the company had gone public. And so I kind of had a sense that like, something's kind of going on here. And then I get called in September of that year. And they said, yeah, we're consolidating the 6 regions down to 2 and you're out. And I was like, what? And they actually offered me to interview for a position that I knew they had no intention of giving me back east, but they did it as, like to try to make nice, right? And so I had to sit on that information until December when we told my staff, and I had 38 people working for me at the time. And I think the thing that was the most challenging for me during that period was that I was so worried about them. I didn't even really kind of think about how I was going to deal with the future after that, because some of them had worked for me for 25 years. And I mean, we had been on this journey together, right? And so, we all get laid off, and I, did as best I could is to help them kind of, pivot and, help with resumes and LinkedIn and all those things. And, I shouldn't have been so worried because they all ended up doing great things. One moved to Spain, one, completely changed careers, one got a great job locally. I mean, they all ended up fine. And so I was so kind of mad about the whole thing and worried about them that I really didn't focus on kind of what I was going to do. And so then a year later, I kind of took the summer off. My daughter was graduating from high school, and I got an opportunity to work for a big real estate company in California, Pacific Union. And I worked there for a year, and I didn't have anybody reporting to me, which was kind of a nice change because that can, having people report to you is, it's a lot. And then the company was bought and I got laid off again. And I was like, wait a minute, what's happening here? I mean, but it was such a different experience because I wasn't mad. I was like, all right, whatever, because I think I didn't have so much invested in it. And I had invested so much in my previous role and I had built it from nothing. And it was so painful for me. But then, the second layoff, I was like, all right, next, I'm just going to like figure out what I'm going to do next. And that's kind of, it was just a very different experience. And it really taught me about being your own advocate. That was the big lesson for me, was how to be my own advocate. And I had assumed at the previous role that I'd been in so long that they all valued what we did. And I hadn't been an advocate for myself. And that was unfortunate.
You highlighted so many things that we could, go deeper with. Really fascinating listening to you. I also related to that, the shock that you were describing initially. I had an experience where I got laid off together with a whole cohort. It was, I mean, I think it was maybe like 2 to 3 business days after a meeting that the whole company had where we were told that there will be no layoffs because they crunched the numbers. And even though it was, right around that time, 2008, 2009, we are doing great. We are exempt from the crisis. It's going to be fine. And I think that was like a Thursday. And then on Monday, it was like, oop, quite
Oh,
literally. And so then there was this like, oh, wow, oh my gosh, this really hurts. And the piece that you were talking about when you talked about, being so invested, you know, it's yes, absolutely. Like blood, sweat, tears, resources, energy, commitment, all of that went into it. Also, then it became part of your identity, it sounds like.
good, without
So,
question.
right. And then there's the other experience where now you're not taking it as personally. Maybe it hasn't quite become part of your identity, but you've also already grown through that process. And the self-advocacy starts to become, something you're becoming more comfortable with. Tell us a little bit more about the fears and the worries that were still, that are underpinning all of these different experiences.
Absolutely. I think the thing that I was most worried about with the first one was that I was worried for the staff, but I was worried that they were going to destroy everything that we had built. Which is so silly that I would think that. Like, who cares? It's not my thing, but it kind of was my thing. And I had invested so much in it. And I thought they're just gonna ruin it. And the transition, what they did it really poorly. They didn't really reach out to all of us, and they kind of just assumed that we would do a great job transitioning, and we did, because that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure we do that. And so they transitioned it really poorly, and it really left a bad taste in my mouth after being there for so long. But with the second layoff, they laid me off, and it was purely a money thing. It was purely, and which is not so dissimilar to the first one, but the first one felt more personal, right? And with the second layoff, it was much more about they got a new CFO, and they just weren't going to move forward with these programs. And it was like, all right, fine, whatever. And the odd thing is that a few months later, they came back and tried to hire me back. And I said, absolutely not. I said, no, thank you. I said, I've had a chance to reflect on it. I feel like this is not the direction that I want to go. If you weren't sure then, how do I know 2 months from now you're not going to be sure again? And so I just decided right then, even though I could have gone back into that role, and it was a great role and it was paid well and all those things, I was just like, this is not the kind of culture that I want to be a part of. It just didn't feel right to me. And it was the right decision at the time, for sure.
Yeah. And I love that because I think sometimes some of us would have jumped right back in, right? It's a regular job, it's steady, it's good, right? But making that difficult decision, I think says a lot about who you are for sure. And then you transitioned. Is that when you went to go to consulting, right? What year was that you went to consulting?
So the layoff was in 2019 at the beginning. And I kind of took the year to really think about it. I interviewed with some people and nothing really felt right. And I kept thinking about consulting. It was in the back of my head.
Mm.
And so towards the latter part of 2019, I decided I was going to start consulting, because what I realized is that through all these growth processes of managing different departments and different business lines, creating all this stuff, I learned a lot, right? And I learned what I didn't want is for people to make the same mistakes that I made along the way, because things took a long time because I was figuring it out on the fly, right?
Right.
So it was one of those things that when I decided to start consulting, I thought, all right, I think I can help people in real estate brokerages around the country learn how to, generate more revenue, not through real estate sales, but through ancillary business. And I think I can help them do that faster than the way I figured it out. And I realized that there was a lot of people out there that really could probably use my help. And I thought, well, I don't know if they'd hire me or not. So I kind of felt it out a little bit. I kind of talked to people. I was like, would you ever want help with that kind of thing? And so I started consulting in January 2020, and we know what happened in 2020. So
Yep.
it was a little rough start. Needless to say, I got clients right out of the gate. And then of course, everything just froze. And I thought, okay, am I going to try to ride through this? Or because I'm certainly not ready to be independent. I'm not independently wealthy. I still needed to work. And I was planning on, I'm planning on working, at the time in 2020, 10 more years. And then I'm out. And, I thought, all right, well, I've got to figure out if I'm going to stick with this. And I had enough positive feedback, even though it was like, we're not going to work with you now, but we will. So I kept at it. And so now I'm 4 years into it, and I love it. I love being able to be in control of my own destiny. Now if I fail, it's my fault, for sure.
Hmm. Can you connect this with that idea of self-advocacy? I know that when I'm listening to what's happening for me and really getting in touch with what's, what's in my deep core wisdom that nobody really needs to agree with or know, but I just know, I have the knowing that this is right. And then what's in my heart of hearts. And then from there, I go into like, what's right for me. That for me is that like the advocacy can then come from there. And it's for me an outside job. So communicating with others about it, advocating for yourself, when you're talking to somebody else about whatever it might be, a brand new endeavor or cleaning things up. Like we heard you talk about how you said that big no. No, thank you. But it was a no. Heck no.
Yeah.
It was a very like strong boundary. And then we heard you talk about being open and curious with folks like, would you like this? Does this sound good? Underneath both of these, I'm hearing you being really like, here you are in touch with yourself, like in touch with that inner, what's right for me here. In this moment, it's to set a boundary. In this other moment is to be, take a risk that people might say no, but here I am offering something. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And does what I'm talking about resonate, and maybe some lessons learned as you're navigating these, like new ways of, being there for yourself?
Absolutely. I think, I see it in my clients. So my clients are typically the real estate broker owners of real estate companies, but I typically work with staff that's lower level that are oftentimes running divisions like relocation divisions like that. And many, many times those are women, probably 85% of the times those are women. But most of the time, the broker owners are men. And it's an inverted situation. And so one of the things I see when I work with my clients is that I see those people that are running the departments are don't know how to articulate their value oftentimes to their leaders. And I don't think it's so much a woman man thing, but I think it can be, in that sometimes we make assumptions that people know the value we bring. We make way too many assumptions. And I tell my clients, I said, look, you have to make sure they see your value. And if that means feels weird talking about yourself and what you've achieved, too bad. You have to do that, because when I got laid off the first time, it was done based on org charts and salaries. I guarantee you, they didn't care who was who. They were trying to save money. They were saving money. And so what I say to people is don't be a victim of, well, we could save this if we get rid of that person. you have to show your value so strongly that they would never dream of letting you go, because they understand that with you gone, that the business might fail, that you run, that you would certainly lose accounts. You have to, even if it feels uncomfortable, you have to be your own advocate. I have a 24-year-old daughter, and I talk to her about that all the time, because I think these younger kids kind of assume that they're going to get roles, but they don't understand that they have to advocate for themselves and explain to people why. Why am I the right person for this? Not just because she has a master's degree, which she does, but why does that matter? It's a lot more than just what how you look on paper. It's what do you bring to the table, and what they would lose if you weren't there. That's a big thing, is that I think in the first layoff, I thought that the people around me that were my seniors that locally would protect me, and they didn't. They were busy trying to protect themselves. And so I think we can't assume that people are going to always understand the value we bring. It's critical that we brag about ourselves and we talk about ourselves in a way that's not arrogant, but in a way that shows the value that you personally bring to the table. I mean, it's critical.
And I think even, and I totally agree with you, Teresa. I think that's one of the hardest things that, especially as women, we have
Right.
a really, really hard time doing. Even I know you were going to say something there, because
Well,
this strikes a chord I know
yeah.
with both of us
Oh,
for
I was like,
sure.
oh my gosh, so good. Well, one of the things that Teresa and I talk about, Teresa Conti and I talk about, is the sticky floor. We talk about there's the glass ceiling, but there's the floor is sticky. So talking about articulating the value, oh my gosh, commend you so much for helping others articulate their value using your examples. That is so, in alignment with what Teresa Conti and I are so passionate about. I find that it's very complicated, complex, overwhelming, difficult for women to articulate the value because we're not really clear what that is for ourselves. And sometimes we simply we underestimate. Other times we overestimate the importance of something that might not have high impact.
Right.
So like being really real with what that is. It is important to have guidance and role models who can really show how you in the work setting articulate the value, but first consider it for yourself, because if you're not clear, you're not going to be able to have that conversation with anybody else. Simultaneously decoupling that from a sense of your own inherent value, because that value, you may be invaluable to your team and the organization, and it is important to articulate that and advocate for it. Also, that doesn't really determine your actual inherent value, and oftentimes I think we get caught up in that. So when the physical thing goes away, or the job goes away, or the role goes away, now I'm like, I'm nothing, I'm worthless now, because all of that value that I was packing into it goes away. And one thing I like to practice is noticing that it doesn't really determine my value, whether things are going well or not. And also, again, when things are successful, that also doesn't really determine your inherent value. When they're not going well, when they're saying like, well, you're now a cog in the wheel and we're letting you go, also doesn't determine, that deep core value of,
So
who I
true.
really am with. Does
It's so
that
true.
resonate with both of you?
Oh, so much. And the challenge is too, sometimes when times are tough, that's when you really do show your value. I've been through many up and down real estate markets. And I was lucky enough that I had a really flexible staff, and a staff that was willing to try new things. And so when in the late 1990s and in the middle of 2000, you mentioned it earlier, when the real estate market was terrible, I started doing REO. I was like, we're going to do foreclosures because that's what's here. So we pivoted, and that wasn't our role. And we started doing foreclosures, and my staff adapted, and we made millions. And the company didn't tell me to do that. We just all went, what are we going to do? How are we going to preserve this business that we've lost, because real estate was clearly way down? So we have to start doing the stuff that is happening, which was dealing with foreclosures. And so we really just took it upon ourselves to do it, and the staff was great, and they figured it out, and we killed it. But nobody in the company, had we not done that, the company probably would have gone, oh man, they're just a drain, they're not making any money anymore, let's get rid of them. So I think the challenge is when times are good, we kind of ride that wave and make a lot of assumptions. And when times are bad, we cower a little bit when in fact we should be stepping up and saying, all right, now what can I do to backfill whatever we've lost? And I think, it's such a challenge. And Teresa, you mentioned it for women particularly. I think we assume so much that they're looking at our P&L and they see that we make money, or they don't hear a complaint. So that must mean I'm doing fine. But
Yeah.
instead, sometimes I find that my clients will focus on the minutia with their leadership. Like quit talking about the stuff that's not important.
Yeah.
You need to talk about the bigger picture of how you affect the company overall, how you affect the economy overall by helping corporations relocate. Like talk higher level that they can relate to, because when you get down in the weeds, they don't care about that stuff. They don't care about the little tiny goals that you have or things like that. That's your problem. That's not theirs. And I think people tend to kind of get in their own head about, well, I've got to do this today. I've got to do this. Your leadership doesn't care. They want to know at a high level how you're affecting the company, them personally, all those things. And that means you have to think at a much bigger scale than what we do. You can't think about, I've got a list of 20 things I have to do today. They don't care about that. They care about how those 20 things are going to impact the company overall and help make their life easier and help make their agents' life easier and all those things that affect the company in a bigger way. So, it's kind of about, you have to get in their head a little bit and think about how you can position yourself so it's meaningful to them. And that means, not talking about the stuff that's irrelevant to them, because we have a tendency to do that, to really
Yeah.
focus on those kind of
Yeah,
things.
I think we do. Honestly, we
Mhm.
have a tendency to talk about things that really aren't important from a big picture standpoint. So, really making sure that we really know what's happening there. So, we just have I want you to cover one more thing before we kind of get to our final question. The advice you'd give someone who finds themselves unexpectedly right late in their career laid off, or needing to make a career change, or whatever that looks like, because as we know, you talked about how real estate is cyclical. Financial services can be cyclical as well, right? A lot going on there. So, what advice would you give someone who's kind of late in their career, who may be facing this unexpected, necessary change?
I think, for me, it was about what parts of my job did I really love, and how would I like that to evolve into a position? And I think, when you're later in your career, you have the luxury of kind of not doing the stuff that, if you don't want to, that's not so fun. And that's why I passed over some jobs that were offered to me, because I thought, I don't want to do that. That's not my thing. Had I been younger, I probably would have taken it. And I think, the key is to really find out what you love and what you're good at. And maybe that even means changing industries. That may even mean completely changing industries, because if you have a certain skill set, it will translate to other businesses and other industries. And so my advice is, don't limit yourself to think I have to get a job like I had before. And think about, how can you really, capitalize later in your career on the connections you've made, on the networking, on the relationships you've made, and how can you translate that into something to be really gratifying for you in the later years of your career, for sure.
An important thing you just said. You said the relationships, the networking, the relationships you've made. So a good piece of advice there is creating those relationships,
Mhm.
investing time in your network while you are in a position that you're in. Doesn't happen later, right? It's
Exactly.
important to have that net. So tell us how these pivots were for you step forward.
It at the time, it was so painful. I mean, the first one at least was so painful. And I worried and fretted, and it was fine. It was fine. It wasn't the end of the world. And I think, the journey took me to have the ability to do what I want to do. I work when I want to work. I choose the clients I want to choose. Am I making as much money as I was before? No, it's fine. I'm much happier. And I think, to anyone out there who finds himself with a change, don't hang on to what happened. Like, use what you learned through that experience, through the role, through the, through the changes that happened, and then see how you can evolve. And I was fortunate that people are willing to hire me. And if they weren't, then I would have gone and done something else. I would have figured it out. But I think, we have to just, again, it goes back to having confidence in yourself, and believing that, the things that you've learned and the relationships that you made will carry you. And to your point, you can't try to all of a sudden appear and try to develop relationships because you need somebody. Those relationships were built over 30 years career. And thankfully, because that's who many of my clients are, people that I've known for many years. So, it speaks to the fact that, when you build those relationships, they can come back in a very positive way when you least expect it.
Absolutely. I love this conversation. And honestly, right, if you hadn't known my husband for since 1999, you probably wouldn't have even been on this podcast. So,
Well, I'm sure I wouldn't
it's all
have. I
good.
wouldn't have known you.
It's all amazing. Well, thank you so much, Teresa. We really, really appreciate you being here. I think a lot of great stuff for our listeners. I have enjoyed this greatly. So we really, really appreciate you having you here.
Thank you both so much. You're doing great
What a
stuff.
great conversation. I'm going to carry with me the gem that you shared about when you were talking about leadership, and, what they need and are looking for is the big picture. And we tend to get, really in the weeds with it and the minutia. I feel like we all should be also aware of that on the inside too. Like on the inside, like what's my big picture? What's the big vision? I heard you really talk about that. Thank you for the advice and the suggestions and just living that example of, brave pivoting.
Thank
Yep.
you. Appreciate it
Thank-
so much being here.
All right. Thanks to everybody for listening to us this week. And remember, if you have a pivot, step into it. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Step Into the Pivot. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights from our conversation. Remember, life is a series of pivots, and it's in those moments of change that we truly grow.
If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay connected, make sure to check out our websites. You'll find additional resources, behind-the-scenes content, and more details about our incredible guests. We love hearing from listeners, so reach out with your thoughts, questions, or your own pivot stories.
To keep the conversation going, be sure to follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn and Instagram, where we share updates, quotes, and engage with our amazing community.
If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback makes a difference, and it helps us bring you meaningful conversations. We're signing off, reminding you that every pivot is a step forward. Take care, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Step Into the Pivot.